Good afternoon. Today's talk will be the first part of a two-part talk on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Mary Shelley began the story of Frankenstein in the summer of 1816, possibly between June 10th and June 16th. It was originally intended as a short narrative of only a few pages, but Mary Shelley developed the story into a full-length novel at her husband's suggestion. Her expedition to Chamonix and Mother Glance at the end of July inspired her creation of the majestic scenery at the end of chapter 9 and the beginning of chapter 10 of this particular novel. She worked regularly on Frankenstein until December 1816, when a number of personal tragedies interrupted her writing. She resumed writing on the novel early in 1817, and by April that year, she completed the first draft of the book. At the end of April, she gave a revised version to her husband Percy, who edited drastically and altered the book's original style. On March 11, 1818, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, as it was alternately titled, was published anonymously in 3 volumes and accompanied by a preface written by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Walter Scott, whose novels were a great popular success at that time, wrote a fairly laudatory review praising the author's uncommon powers of poetic imagination. He also observed that the ideas are always clearly as well as forcibly expressed, quote unquote, and that the descriptions of landscape have in them the choice of requisites of truth, freshness, precision, and beauty. Other reviewers were a mixture of positive and negative comments, but whatever their criticisms, most reviewers recognized the book's unusual intensity and poetic power. It was republished in 1831, and the novel was revised again heavily, and the revised version incorporated Shelley's own preface with the title Author's Introduction. Now, Frankenstein, without doubt, is Mary Shelley's greatest literary achievement and one of the most complex literary works of all times. The novel is also an important document of the period. It addresses the issues including the nature of knowledge, the power of imagination, the function of the artist and of the artistic act, and the relationship with nature, all of which obsessed all the major romantic writers of her times. But more importantly, the novel articulates a vision that significantly contradicts the idealistic romantic perspective on these issues. Unlike most romantic writers, Mary Shelley seems interested in the dark, self destructive side of human reality and the human soul. The 1831 edition of Frankenstein, the one that is usually read as the final text of the novel, articulates an even darker perspective and consequently a more powerful critique of the optimistic, uplifting romantic ideology than the original 1818 version. Romantic artists invested imagination with an almost religious function and attributed poets and artists in general not only to a political role but also an educative role and also to a prophetic one. Mary Shelley responded to this glorification of imagination with some amount of skepticism in her novel. In her novel, for example, we see Victor Frankenstein's creation seriously questions the role of imagination in our lives and the consequences of divorcing imagination from all ethical implications. If, as Francesco Goya suggests in his disturbing painting, the sleep of reason creates monsters, Mary Shelley may very well have used her protagonist and his creation to demonstrate that an imagination ungoverned by moral values creates not only monsters but effectively existential nightmares. Many romantics believed in the supremacy of knowledge and revered the ability of the human mind to decipher the secrets of nature. Moreover, they celebrated any act of transgression, such as violation of laws, rules, rebellion against them, and rejection of established order, as an act of human excellence. This passion for the forbidden, as it were, conjoined with a strong attachment for the sublime essentiality, translates into an obsessive fascination with power and with the idea of dominance in general. Mary Shelley not only declares these obsessions ignoble and destructive, but also supports a philosophy based mainly on love, beauty, and humanistic values. The romantic faith in nature, as well as in man's blissful relationship with nature, represents another romantic myth that Mary Shelley demystifies in her novel very powerfully. In the final edition of Frankenstein, that is the 1831 edition, nature ceases to be the benevolent, nurturing, gentle force that the poetry of Wordsworth Coleridge and so many other romantic poets invoked and celebrated. Instead, nature appears as a mighty machine, as if acting blindly and capriciously in a universe emptied of love, beauty, and compassion. Victor is undoubtedly the victim of a selfish desire to transgress the limits of his own condition and existence and to obtain unlimited power and understanding. But he is also, if not more so, the victim of forces much beyond his control. Victor and most of the other characters of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein live in a somewhat mechanistic and arbitrary world where everything is as if regulated by the same immutable and supreme laws. To these laws, Justin advises Elizabeth as well as the readers that individuals need to submit in patience, quote unquote. Frankenstein, therefore, is clearly a novel that not only repudiates or problematizes most of the doctrines established by romantic ideology, the novel also anticipates serious existential questions and disputes about human nature and human existence that characterize modernism, for example. Thus, the monster's ambiguous nature is especially effective and conveys the disturbing image and message that each creature, and for that matter each creative act, possesses the potential for both infinite good and infinite evil. Imagination, mind, creativity, the categories that usually form the foundation of Romanticism's firm conviction in man's superiority and perfectibility and in human beings' ability to change themselves and the world, can all be associated with the monster as well, and as a result can all be distrusted. Equally modern is the manner in which Mary Shelley positions her audience. She does not allow readers to remain passive at all in the novel, either intellectually or otherwise, but instead invites them to become active participants in the creation of meaning. In fact, readers are now somehow coerced, as it were, to actively engage with the situations, characters, and philosophical ideas of the novel, because the familiar and the reliable narrator who knows, explains, and decodes everything for the readers is simply eliminated in the novel. The French critic Roland Barthes offers a useful distinction in this context between traditional texts presenting a world that can be comprehended with a minimum or even no effort from the readers, and modern texts which tests seriously the reader's interpretive abilities and encourages them to cooperate with the writer in unveiling the complexity of the text and the world, and to decipher the various layers of meaning that such texts contain. The first category of traditional texts he calls readerly texts, and the second category, the modern ones, he calls writerly texts. In this context, we can definitely say that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a text that constantly requires readers' participation, judgment, involvement, and insight, and therefore, without doubt, Frankenstein constitutes a writerly text, to use Barthes, and consequently a modern one. The novel's original narrative structure and the use of different narrators and different points of view are strikingly modern as well. Critics almost unanimously notice that the novel's structure is similar to a set of Chinese boxes, as it were, each of which fits into a next larger box, and the frame of narration in Frankenstein is constituted by the letters that Captain Robert Walton, the explorer of the North Pole, sends to his sister, Mrs. Saville, in England. These letters open and close the novel. Within these letters, the readers, together with Walton's sister, read the bizarre narrative of Victor Frankenstein, and within Victor's narrative, the narrative of the monster. Interestingly, the narrative of the monster consists of two different perspectives. One is Victor's account of the monster and the monster's direct confession to Walton. Consequently, what Mrs. Saville reads is Victor's doubly mediated story. The first is Victor's version, and then Walton's account of Victor's story, and the monster's triple mediated story. First Victor's version, next the monster's direct account, and then Walton's narration of the monster's story. To complicate this situation, this narrative frame even further, when the letters Margaret receives are in fact the complete letters, or simply large fragments of them, is deliberately made unclear by Mary. By the time Victor tells Walton his story, he is almost recovered from his illness, but Victor is still in a state of exhaustion and tiredness. He speaks in broken accents and is weakened by the paroxysm of grief that had seized him. Furthermore, Walton is clearly biased and seems blinded by his enthusiasm, a rather strange combination of exhilaration, uncritical devotion, and agitation. To quote him, he says, or rather asks, "Will you smile at the enthusiasm I express concerning the divine wanderer?" He asks timidly to his sister and implicitly the readers. But Walton surely knows that by calling Victor divine and by insisting that Victor possesses a certain quality that elevates him so immeasurably above any other person, a smile and a certain type of distrust may indeed be the natural reactions to his strange attachment. And yet, the one who essentially weakens any illusory trust in the narrator's reliability and forces to pay special attention to the novel's seductive but difficult to pinpoint and locate story is perhaps Mary Shelley herself. Toward the end of her introduction to the 1831 version of the novel, Mary Shelley writes, and I quote, "I have an affection for my hideous progeny, but it was the offspring of happy days, when death and grief were but words." And in the final paragraph, she writes, and I quote again, "I have changed no portion of the story, nor introduced any new ideas or circumstances, leaving the core and the substance untouched." Unquote. However, the informed reader realizes that she does not tell the truth. The days she invokes may be declared the happy days of her life, but death and grief are without question not simply words, but almost permanent companions, as it were, of a young and troubled existence. In the second version of the story of Frankenstein, the novel was heavily revised in ways that fundamentally altered the core and the substance of the book. The revisions effectively added a note of profound negativity and pessimism, as it were, even desperation regarding man's essentially and inescapably tragic condition. Mary Shelley knows now the horror, to quote Conrad, of being a creature, but like Marlowe in Conrad's novella, she decides not to tell the whole truth. Frankenstein is, in fact, compared to Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which again attests to its modernity. The book is also compared, in some aspects, to Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. These stories present disturbing events in which a direct participant relates the story to an audience. However, Mary Shelley is not simply a participant in a story. She is a creator of one. Her fertile imagination conceived and expanded, to quote her again, upon so very hideous an idea, unquote, created a story that does indeed speak to the mysterious fears of human nature and makes readers dread to look around, to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart, unquote. What was initially intended to test the author's power of invention and confirm her as a gifted writer became a dangerous and terrifying experiment, both at the level of plot as well as at the level of narration. She discovered that imagination was no longer a source of invention and freedom, or the sanity of true genius, quote unquote, as Charles Lamb wrote way back in 1826, or the poetry of life as defined by her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley. But instead, imagination became a monstrous faculty, one that, like Pandora's box, could open secret doors into unknown territories of darkness. Instead of liberating or enchanting her, imagination possessed and haunted her. Too late to go back to the controllable and predictable reality, Mary Shelley had to write her unlucky ghost story and let what terrified her terrify others. And as a result, the disturbing story of Mary Shelley's monster possesses and haunts everyone's lives, constantly and inescapably reminding everyone that the world is a beautiful but a dangerous place. Today, Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein remains profoundly relevant, not only because of the previous reasons, but also because it addresses crucial issues of general interest in any time period, be it education and the importance of knowledge, be it alienation and loss of friendship or love, be it rejection and abandonment, be it responsibility and even ethical conduct. Contemporary audiences can immediately recognize that the questions raised by the novel are questions of serious importance for intellectual and emotional development, as are the questions about identity, freedom, the nature of evil, love, knowledge, suffering, death, and faith. And the fact that Mary Shelley's novel has achieved such visibility and prominence in popular culture because of its adaptations to stage, film, music, and television testifies to its enduring ability to provoke and intrigue readers. Despite the novel's inconsistencies, obscurities, complicated syntax, difficult diction, and at times exotic references, it certainly constitutes one of the most powerful literary works written in the English Romantic period. Thank you. So this was the first part of my talk on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In my next lecture, we'll be discussing at various critical and literary aspects of Frankenstein in some greater detail. Thank you.